This is my third and final talk of the week on kind of the theme of using APL for education and teaching and stuff. Now I'm going to tell you about Jupyter Notebooks. Who doesn't know what Jupyter Notebooks are? That's pretty good, huh? I don't have to do anything. See you later. Thanks. Okay, that's cool then, because I was going to say Adam's talked about them before, so you can find them on the webinar, and last year he talked about them as well, so I don't need to talk too much about what they are, except coded documents, really cool idea. Write your explanations and have code in between. So you have code blocks that look like this, and you can execute your code in line. So wow, that's pretty good. And use markdown to format your text and make it look nice. Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir here apparently. LaTeX, in there. So have your formatted traditional mathematical notation, and then this is a non-executable APL formatted in markdown for what's that, Euler's identity. And then right below that, okay, you can actually try it, and it works. So yeah, they're really straightforward. I really like them. I've started and I'm going to be using them a lot for different types of things, like especially how-to style tutorials and documentation. I think like you got some application and you want to have some document that shows people how to use it. I think a really good way of doing that would be, you have a Jupyter Notebook with your application sort of loaded in, and then you have your introduction, you give it a context, you sort of explain some things, and then you put the code blocks in with examples of how to call the functions and run the stuff, and maybe even some suggestions of things to tweak. So try changing this and see what the change in output is and things like that. And you can really sort of learn by doing that way. Another use case is, in schools, setting assignments to students, or you could do like problem sets where you can then solve the problems in line with the sets, and then it's just, I think the format's just like ends up as a JSON thing. You can easily send solved notebooks around back to the teacher for them to grade. And this would also be really good where people are doing like the flipped classroom environment thing, where most of the work gets done sort of at home, and then the students just come back into class and talk about what they did with the teacher afterwards. And this actually reminds me, I forgot to bring it up, of not too long after I joined Dyalog, and we were talking about how I was going to, start writing tutorials and documents for new users to start finding out where they're going, which hasn't quite gotten as far as I'd hoped by now, but I'm working on it. I was shown this binder, this folder here, which is a working introduction to APL by Ken Iverson from 1981. And the first paragraph in the introduction is this one. I have long been struck by the contrast between the success with which the adventurous learn APL by simply using it, and the frequent failure of lecture courses to communicate the simplicity and applicability of the language. He then goes on to say how he was happy to make the course or whatever, but I didn't think that was quite as relevant to my point, so I've cut it here. But yeah, I think that's somewhat reflected in the Jupyter Notebooks and what's called literate programming paradigm. The idea that instead of just being lectured at and told stuff forever, actually we saw that in the teaching without teaching thing earlier. That was kind of on the same kind of vibe. The idea that you should just start exploring and playing with things, and then you learn better that way, or at least when you go away, you still remember what you found out, instead of just kind of either being able to regurgitate things or just completely forgetting what happened in that hour. Also, look at this. I've kind of pulled the wool over your eyes a little bit. This has been a Jupyter Notebook the whole time. So what's this? It's called Reveal.js. It's just a JavaScript library where you can turn your notebooks. Actually, I think it's generally for like HTML documents into slideshow presentations. But it works really easily with Jupyter Notebooks, so I can actually sort of demonstrate. I can add a code block. We can execute some APL. That's in my little setup file there. This is the Jupyter Lab environment, which has just a fairly nice interface for doing stuff. So I can play with the metadata in the cell and tell it to make a new slide out of this cell I've just done. I'm going to save that. Then I'm running my notebooks in a virtual machine on Linux just because it keeps everything from, if I screw something up, I'll just reset the virtual machine. I don't break my Windows environment by doing this. So this is where I was running the notebook, and then we send it back. And that's the thing you just saw, and then there's the code that I literally just executed now. You can see the time. The duck tells you the time. Something else that I quite like about doing it this way is I don't have to worry about copying and pasting and formatting the code and the output and stuff. It just sort of turns up there, which is kind of cool. So yeah, this is awesome magic. You should definitely be using it to make tutorials, more educational materials for APL. I have the seed of an idea of the new Apl course that I'm going to be working on, and I'll be really interested in people communicating with me and giving lots of feedback on how that gets developed. But in my opinion, once you've got the system set up, it's trivial, it's nothing. You type your explanations, you type your code. The hardest bit is thinking about what you want to talk about. But actually, the biggest hurdle to Jupyter Notebooks is really getting started and installing the system. It's not too terrible, but there's different use cases depending on what you want. Also, the default is Python, because that's what it was sort of invented for, Python, Julia, and R, which the Jupyter name comes from. So if you want to use Dyalog like this, then you have to install our kernel. And there are instructions on the GitHub for that. And it's not, it's not too much, but it's still stuff to do. There's different interfaces, like if you just want to play with notebooks, then Jupyter Notebook is cool because it's like one line if you're on the default Linux install, but it's a bit bland. Jupyter Lab is slightly nicer, and it's it's like 2 more lines to install on Linux. Then there's also something called Jupyter Hub, which I'll also demo in a minute, which is multiple user environments. This would be really good for in a classroom or institution, university setting or something. If you're in a class, you could, as the teacher, either on the school network or on your actual laptop, have the server running, and then all your students basically just have a username and log in, and they have their own little isolated environment. You can send them your assignments that way, and they don't have to install anything. They don't have to even install anything on the individual computers. You've got one server running, you just go on the web browser. And the littlest Jupyter Hub is like a really easy to install environment for that purpose. But yeah, it's not too bad, but there's still stuff to do. I don't want to have to do anything to get work to start using this. Well, recently I've been playing with this binder thing, and I'm going to start loading it before I tell you what it is, and you'll see why in a second. But basically, at the minute, you can go to this GitHub repository and you click a button, and it's going to take a while, so I'm going to fill this space with words. Yeah, Binder is basically freely hosted interactive Jupyter Notebooks, and obviously by default they're Python, but all you have to do is have a GitHub repository with Jupyter Notebooks, and you point it at mybinder.org, and they will spin up a Docker container for you, and depending on what your, like the default Python ones are a bit quicker than this. They'll spin up a Docker container that is running Jupyter Notebooks, and you can just start interacting there and then. What else about this? Yeah, so all it is that we've done is put so it's about a minute, sure, Docker container on Docker Hub, and then on the GitHub repository there's a Docker file, and then Binder uses the Docker file to build the image to build the Docker image to run. So you can actually use your own Dyalog notebooks as well if you just have the from line at the top here and then copy whatever, make sure you have the copy line for whatever's in your repository, your own notebooks, which in my case I've got this folder called first notebooks, and that will get copied into the binder image and then they end up here. So that's, I think this is a version of this presentation. And the code's executable and everything. Yeah. So it's that easy. You just go and you click a button and you can start using these. You must remember to like download your work before your session ends because it won't live forever. If you leave this alone, then the Docker container will get killed at some point and then you'll lose everything you've done. So that's just something to watch out for. What else can I do? We can make a new Dyalog notebook. You can put markdown. I think you'll all seen stuff like this. So I'm not going to spend too long demoing notebooks. Look, license agreement. What else was I going to talk about? You can also execute your notebooks in try-APL. So that's a way to quickly create notebooks, but obviously it takes some time to spin up and you have that format. But as of late last year, was it? Or sometime last year, try-APL got support for Jupyter Notebooks so that you can, say, it's not going to be that interesting to look at this one, but you just copy the link for a notebook, and you go on try-APL and the Learn tab, and at the bottom you can paste it doesn't have to be GitHub for this, it can be any online hosted notebook, and we will execute line by line your Dyalog Jupyter Notebooks. So maybe this would be cool if you had something that is a lot more linear in structure and you did want to make sure that people got things from the top all the way down, executing line by line. It's also a little bit more convenient than spinning up the notebook thing. So that's really cool. And also, you don't have to do any Jupyter stuff to show people the content, right? If you have something on GitHub, then by default it will render. It's not interactive in this version, but it will render the notebooks reasonably well. So you can show people all your nice code snippets and think, well, bigger than code snippets because you want explanation as well, otherwise it's a one-liner. But you can show people all of that really, really easily. What else? If you do want to go through, the small hoops, and then depending on your system, like Jupyter Hub, which I'll show you in a second, slightly bigger hoops, then there are details of that on the GitHub repository, which is GitHub/dialog19/D16, which is the code for this talk. And in the first notebooks, one of them is this presentation, so all the links that I've showed you, everything like that, this is how you can go and get hold of that. And another one is some sort of notes on installing the system locally for different operating systems, and if you want to use Jupyter Hub, then you have to do an extra step. So installing the kernel on a default Jupyter thing is just executing one single script, which is like .bat in Windows and .sh for Mac and Linux. But if you're using Jupyter Hub, you have to do a little bit more effort, but it's just copying a couple of folders, and this tells you how to do that. Some other stuff. And then Jupyter Hub demo. So if anyone's got their laptop out and is connected to the Wi-Fi, we can go to wherever I put it, one of these tabs. This place. So I'm currently running a Jupyter Hub right now on this laptop. If you go there, you get this little sign-up page. You can enter a username and a password right now, and don't use any password you care about because it's not HTTPS and nothing is secure. But yeah, you can play with it. I'm going to leave this up during the break in a second, so you also have some time then if you want to just have a little noodle. But you sign up with a username and password, and then you can go to the home page and you'll see a login screen. But this is Ooh, is that? This is the start of translating something I got from Aaron Sue into a notebook about an array data model. But you won't be able to see that one. But you can see this one, which is this presentation with the thing for getting the IP address at the top. And then you can, play around with Dyalog Jupyter Notebooks. I'm currently running, like I said, in a Docker container with Linux. So Jupyter Hub you can't install on anything but Linux, I think. They only support installing on Linux, so I had to use a virtual machine. But in general, I also kind of personally feel like advise, if you're installing these systems, doing it in virtual machines is really convenient because it keeps everything separate for your main system, and you can copy the virtual machine around to other places and without having to fuss with any extra. If you know it works, which is why I've done it for this presentation, right? Nothing's fallen over yet, it's good. So yeah, you can go on that. I'll actually, you know what, while we're right here, I forget. I can get this and make it big, and I can pin this up. So now you can see where to go while I just quickly show you closing slides. So there's a binder thing, so you don't have to install anything. Go on here, go on this GitHub. If it moves to a different GitHub repository, all this stuff, then you'll find out on that GitHub repository it'll point you to. So this is where to go to just click a button and start using Dyalog Jupyter Notebooks and create your coded documents for tutorials and training and education and sort of the more instructional side of documentation. And also, we are really interested in your content as well. If you want to share any notebooks you make, then please send them to notebooks@dialog.com. And that's where to find everything. So, yeah, please use this. It's really good. Very briefly, I'd mentioned about creating new Apl Course. So anyone who's interested in that and wants to help provide feedback over the course of that development, please come find me and make sure I have your email address, and we can coordinate and stuff. So yeah, thanks very much.